Dear students, welcome to the new session. Today's topic for discussion is issues in corporate governance. So it has been defined in different ways. Governance was given different context by different writers and organizations. Some they define it in a narrow perspective to include their shareholders. Some define it in a broad perspective about the concern of all stakeholders. Some of them talk about governance being an important instrument for a country to achieve the sustainable economic development, while some others consider it as a corporate strategy to achieve a long tenure and a healthy image. So to people in developing societies and transitional economies, it is a necessary incentive to usher in a more powerful and vibrant institutions of control. Here we can provide some other dimension to the corporate ethics and social responsibility of business. So to different people, corporate governance has a different meaning. But to all, corporate governance is a means to an end. The end being a long-term stakeholder value. In a broader perspective, corporate governance, it adds value. All the authorities on the subject are one in recognizing the need for good governance practices to achieve the end for which the corporates are formed, right? So this session we are going to focus on some governance issues which are being very crucial and critical to achieve those objectives. So first issue is that distinguishing the roles of director, the boards and the management. How will you distinguish the role of board and management? Constitutions of more and more companies stress and underline that the business is to be managed. So the responsibility for managing the business is delegated by the board to the CEO. So who in turn delegates the responsibility to other senior executives. Am I right? So this is how the chain of commanders. The business is moving in a particular direction. Under the direction of the board delegates the work to the CEO and the CEO delegates the responsibility of that to the senior executive. The board occupies a key position between the shareholders and the company management. The board of a listed company, it has to adhere to certain functions. The first function of a board is that select, decide the remuneration and evaluate on a regular basis and when necessary change the CEO. This is the first function of the board. And again repeating, select, decide the remuneration and evaluate on a regular basis and when necessary you can have the right to change the CEO as well. So the second function is overseeing the conduct of the company's business activities to evaluate whether or not it is being managed properly. So you need a monitoring mechanism to understand the regular functioning of the business activities. So that is the second responsibility of the board and the management. The third is review and wherever necessary approve the company's financial objectives and major corporate plans. So you need to have this approval as well as review procedure as part of the responsibilities of the board and management. Fourth is render advice and counsel the top management. That includes the board as well. Fifth is identify and recommend the candidates to the shareholders for electing them to the board of directors. So, if you are going with the right person for the right profile, then obviously that will be a fit between the person and the organization. So, you need to identify and recommend the candidates to the shareholders so that they can be part of the board as well. The sixth function is review the adequacy of systems to comply with all applicable laws and regulations. The last function is all other functions required by law to be performed. So you are identifying and recommending the candidates to shareholders for electing them to the board of directors. You are reviewing the adequacy of systems to comply with all applicable laws and regulations, and finally all the other functions required by the law to be performed. The second issue is that the composition of the board. See, a board of directors is a committee, right? Elected by that shareholders of a particular limited company to be responsible for the policy of the company. Sometimes full-time functional directors are appointed, and when I say full-time functional director, each being responsible for their branch and they are contributing to the firm's work as a whole. So the composition of the board of directors refers to the number of directors of different kinds. They participate in the work of the board, and over a period of time there has been a change as that the number and proportion of the different types of directors in a board of a company. See, as you see in this particular picture, we have the types of directors. Okay, you have executive, non-executive directors. Under executive, non-executive directors, you have independent, affiliate directors. As we have already discussed in the previous session, the SEBI appointed Kumaramangalam Birla Committee, and the objective or the task allocated to the committee is to define the composition of the board. So what was the suggestion of the board? The board of directors of a company. The board of directors of a company shall have an optimum combination of executive and non-executive directors with not less than 50% of the board of directors to be non-executive directors. And then the number of independent directors would depend whether the chairman is executive or non-executive. In case of a non-executive chairman, at least 1/3 of the board should comprise independent directors. And in case of executive chairman, at least half of the board should be independent directors. So that will be an optimum combination where with not less than 50% of the board to be non-executive directors. As I already mentioned, whether the chairman is executive or non-executive, but this composition should be followed. An executive director is one who is an executive of the company and also a member of the board of directors. While non-executive director has no separate employment relationship with the company. Independent non-executive directors are those directors on the board who are free from any business. Materially they interfere with the exercise of their independent judgment in the process. So an affiliated director or a nominee director who has some kind of independence with the company, with the company's management, where I can put that example, the director may have links with the suppliers or customers. They may have a partner in a professional firm that supplies services to the company. So here the roles and responsibilities of an executive director, an updated director, it has its own kinds. So this is how the composition of the boards and the issues are. Now the third issue pertaining to the fact is that the separation of the roles of CEO and chairperson. See, the composition of the board is a major issue in corporate governance, as the board acts as a link between the shareholders and the management, and its decision affect the performance of a company. Professionalization of family companies, they should commence with the composition of the board. See, all committees, whatever we have seen, last session, or all the committees across the globe, it all started with whom? Cadbury Committee. They have suggested various improvements in the composition of the board of companies. It is now being realized that the practice of combining the role of chairperson with that of a CEO, it has been done in countries like US and India. It leads to conflicts in decision making. Too much concentration of power and authority in one person, and that results in some unhealthy consequences. If you take UK, Australia, the CEO is prohibited from being the chairperson of the company. So the role of the CEO is to lead the senior management team in an enterprise, while the role of the chairperson is to lead the board. One important responsibility of the board is that to evaluate the performance of the senior executives, including the CEO. So this is how the framework works. Combining the role of both the CEO and chairperson removes an important check on the senior management's activities. If you take larger corporations, the job of the CEO as well as that of a chairman may be a humongous task. However, more business nature he may possess, may not be able to deliver what he is expected to efficiently. So that's the reason why many authorities on corporate governance, they recommend strongly that the chairman of the board should be an independent director to provide the appropriate counterbalance and check to the power of the CEO. The fourth issue which we can discuss is of, should the board have committees? Many committees on corporate governance have recommended in one voice about nomination, remuneration, auditing. So these committees would lessen the burden of the board and enhance the effectiveness. According to Bosch Report Committee, apart from having written the terms of reference outlining the authorities' duties and responsibilities, they have mentioned that it should also have clear procedures. It should also have clear procedure for reporting back to the board. So when these committees are people with independent directors selected for their competence, professional expertise in their chosen field, and long years of experience, that will help with the respective board. So the next issue which we can discuss about is that the appointments to the board of directors and the re-election. See, as per the Indian company law, shareholders, they elect the directors to the board. Shareholders are a legion in a large company, and they are scattered. To have them together to elect the directors, it will be an expensive work and time consuming as well. Therefore, in actual practice, in most cases, the board or especially the constituted committee, they select and appoint the prospective director and gets the person formally elected by the shareholders at the ensuing annual general body meeting. So as that has become an expensive and time consuming process, they have an alternate mechanism of this. In Indian context, if you see 90% almost of appointments to the board is done at the behest of the promoters, who also double as the CEOs or MDs. Although this is not the ideal situation, the practice continues because of so many loopholes in the implementation of law. Shareholders, in fact, they only endorse the board's nominees, and it is only in the rarest of rare cases that shareholders refuse to ratify the board's nominees for directorship. There are other issues of governance in relation to the board's appointments, like the appointment of a nomination committee, terms of office, duties, remuneration, re-election of directors and composition of the board, on which several committees they have made their own recommendations. So with regard to the issue of appointment, these are all the points you need to remember. Next is directors and executives remuneration. See, this is one of the mixed issues of governance that has come to the center stage during the massive corporate failures in the US, that too between the year of 2000 to 2002. So, according to Cadbury report, the overriding principle in respect of board remuneration is that shareholders are entitled to a full and clear statement of directors' present and future benefits and how they have been determined. So, other committees of corporate governance, they have laid an emphasis on issues like pay for performance, severance payments, pension for non-executive directors, appointment of remuneration committee. But still, there is a controversy often surrounds with respect to the size and the quantum of remuneration. That is not necessarily an issue of governance, but a payment that may be excessive in one context may be reasonable in another. So here the key governance issues are the transparency, the pay for performance, process for determination, severance payments and pension for non-executive directors. So these are all the governance issues we can discuss under this directors and executives remuneration. Issue we are going to discuss is that protection of shareholders' rights and their expectations. This is a very, very important governance issue which has a very considerable impact on the rights and expectations of shareholders. See, corporate practices and policies vary from country to country. Already we have discussed this. There are a number of questions relating to this issue, like should companies always adhere to one share, one vote principle? This is the first question that has been raised. Should companies always adhere to one share, one vote principle? Second, should companies retain voting by shows of hands or by poll? Third, can shareholders to place together before shareholders for approval a resolution that contains more than one discrete issue? Should shareholder approval be required for all major transactions? So these questions have elicited answers with different emphasis from various committees and organizations that have addressed these issues. So this is pertaining with regard to the protection of shareholders' rights, and why I have mentioned that is a very important issue is that why governance has been introduced, why we are talking more about it, because this is something which has been framed for the interest of the shareholders. In such a way, this particular issue has been discussed. The next issue is the dialogue with institutional shareholders. The Canberra Committee recommends the institutional investors should maintain a regular and systematic contact with companies apart from their participation in general meetings of shareholders. So, using their voting rights positively, take a positive interest in the composition of the board of directors of companies in which they invest, and above all, recognize their rights and responsibilities as owners who should act in the best interest of those whose money they have invested, so that by influencing the standards of corporate governance and by bringing about changes in companies. So if institutional investors have to exercise their rights and carry out their responsibilities, companies have to provide them the required information and facilities. So this is why we discuss more about the dialogue with institutional shareholders. The next is, should investors have a say in making a company socially responsible corporate citizen? See, this highlights an issue of conflict between two schools of thought. One school, it's based on past experiences that the institutional investors should act in the best financial interest of the beneficiaries. And this is based on the assumption of socially responsible behavior of corporations. Let it be ecological preservation or air pollution measures or producing a quality and environment friendly products that enhances cost and reduce profits. There is another school of thought which asserts the environment friendliness and economic gains that are not contradicting goals. They benefit corporations in the long run. Let me give you some examples like Ford Motors, Johnson & Johnson, Pfizer. So here are some examples where they benefit the corporations in the long run. Much can be being on both sides. So right now in the divergent society, preferably a stronger one, corporates are committed to the overall welfare of the people in whose midst they work and they make their gains. So these are all the issues in corporate governance. So in today's session, we have discussed about the various issues in corporate governance and what are the roles and responsibilities and how the board, the management, the shareholders have to work hand in hand to resolve such issues that have been already recommended by several committees across the globe. So thank you for attending today's session. We'll meet you all in the next session. Thank you.